In this tutorial, I'm going to teach you how to make 3D product renders directly inside of After Effects using the advanced 3D render engine. 3D has come a long way in After Effects, especially now that we can work with 3D models natively, no third-party tools required. The first thing you'll need is a 3D model. So I'm gonna drag in this pair of Bluetooth headphones that I licensed from Adobe stock. It's an OBJ, and it automatically brings in the materials that are associated with it. I can just drag this straight to the new comp button and choose how I want this model to be handled. So clearly it's really, really big up here. So I'm just gonna click on the Make Comp Size button, and that's a much better scale for my comp. I'll click OK and just check my comp settings by pressing Controller Command K. So I'm working in a 1920 by 1080 comp. I would like to work at 30 frames per second though, not 24, so I'm gonna change that. The duration's 30 seconds, that's plenty long. I'll click OK. If I click on the model, you can see that this behaves just like any other 3D layer, except that this is true 3D geometry, and it's extremely responsive. I'm always amazed at how fast this is to render. This is the advanced 3D render engine that is required for these 3D models. But I'm not looking at this in draft mode. This is the final rendered version, and it looks great. Now, I would like to change the lighting up a little bit. What we're seeing right now is just the default After Effects light, and we can actually light things using HDRI environment images. And I downloaded a free HDRI from polyhaven.com. This is an incredible resource full of free HDRIs and other assets, so definitely go check this out. There's a link down in the description. But I'm gonna import this HDR image into my scene, and I can drag this out into the comp. Now, After Effects is just going to look at this like an image until I use an environment light to actually light the scene with this image. So let's go up to Layer, New, Light, and choose Environment as the light type. I'll leave it at 100% intensity and click OK. Now, this is still just the default source, so I'm gonna change it to my Photo Studio HDR image, and that will disable the visibility of the image, but use it to light the scene. And if I zoom in here, I can rotate this light around by pressing R on the environment light, and you can see that reflection of the studio in the headphones. And depending on what type of HDR environment you're using, this could be extremely stylized with lots of cool colors. I'm just going with this Photo Studio to give nice soft lighting with some good reflections. Next, we need a camera to animate this scene. So I'm gonna go up to Layer, New, Camera. Make sure this is set to a 2-node camera, so I have a point of interest and a position for the camera controls. And then I'm gonna use the preset of 80 millimeters, and I'll just click OK. That shifts the perspective a little bit, but now if I press C a few times, I can get to my dolly tool, and I wanna make sure that I'm on the dolly to camera point of interest tool. That way, it's always dollying in and out towards that point of interest. And if I switch to my orbit tool, same thing. I'll hold down Shift and press C 2 times to get to my orbit around the point of interest tool, and I can move the camera around that object. So that's great. Let's reset the orientation here. I'm gonna right click and say Reset on my Properties panel. And I'll do the same thing for the camera's position. I'll just reset that so it's looking straight on. Now I wanna move the anchor point of these headphones, and we can do this just like any other layer. I'll press Y to get to the anchor point tool, and I can move this up in the Y-axis just so I can now rotate the object around more of a midpoint for those headphones. Then I'm gonna drop this down so we can center it in our comp, and I need to dolly the camera back a little bit. So again, I'll press C a few times to get to that dolly towards point of interest tool and just back this up a bit. Now in this product render, I wanna start on the side of the headphones and kind of have it angled at a 45. And as the camera pulls back out, there are actually going to be 5 different versions of this model, all different colors showing off the entire range of this product line, and the camera is gonna be rotating as well. So I'm gonna have to think through how I wanna set this up just for easy animation. But the problem I have with this model is that the logo for this brand isn't actually on it. I wanna put the logo here and here so that we actually have the branding on the product. And to do that, I'm actually gonna jump into Photoshop. Along with the OBJ and other model information is a folder with the textures for the material of these headphones. And this image right here is the base color image. So I just opened that inside of Photoshop, and this is going to be a destructive edit, so I encourage you to make a backup copy of this material before you make changes. But anything we change in here will be updated in the model in After Effects. And I know this is a very strange view if you're not used to working with 3D. This is an unwrapped UV color map that maps out the entire texture in this nice contained square image. We just have to find where the logo should be. This play pause button inside of After Effects is on one side, right where I want the logo to be, and I've already done some trial and error to find that right over here is where I need to put the logo for the other side of the headphones. This is the full logo, but I just need this part of it, so I'm gonna copy this over to this image, and I wanna change its color to match the interface of the headphones. So I'm just gonna click on my eyedropper tool and sample that color, and then lock the transparency of this layer and fill it with Alt Option and backspace. And that changes the color of my logo, and now I can place this where it needs to be. All right, so I placed my logos, and as long as I save this here and jump back to After Effects, it's going to automatically reload the footage, reload the materials, and I can see the logo on either side of the headphones now. Now we need to change the colors of these headphones, and I could have done that inside of Photoshop as well, but I'm gonna show you how to do that here inside of After Effects instead, just so we can make those changes a little bit more quickly. So let's once again just reset the position of the camera, and I'll dolly it back just a little bit, and I want these headphones to start rotated 90 degrees towards the camera. So I'm gonna orient them that way. And instead of rotating the headphones like this to fill the frame a little bit more diagonally, I'm actually gonna rotate the camera on the Z rotation. So let me just push this in a little bit more so we fill that frame and rotate it like this. Now I need 5 copies of these headphones all aligned perfectly so that the front one is hiding all of the ones behind it. So I'm gonna switch to a 2-up view. If I expand my comp viewer a little bit, I can switch from 1 to 2 views. And on the left side, I wanna be viewing this from the top. And I can dolly out here and navigate around just like any other comp, it's just looking straight down. But I wanna duplicate this a handful of times. So Controller Command D, and then just drag this back on the X axis so that it's not touching, but it's also hidden behind this front one. And I'll just do that a few more times. So just reposition this, duplicate, drag it back on the X axis. And I need 5 copies total, so I'll just do that 2 more times. Okay, so that's done. I'm gonna switch back to one view, and we can kind of see the other headphones there. So I'm gonna switch to my orbit tool, pressing C a few times, and I'm just gonna rotate the camera so we only see that instance that's right in the front. And I think that's gonna obscure everything just right so that we're only seeing this one to start. Now really quickly, I'm just gonna rename these layers so that I can keep track of which one's which. All right, now let's work on keyframing the camera and the headphones. And before I add position keyframes on the headphones, I actually wanna add in controllers for each one of them using null objects. So I'm gonna press Control-Alt-Shift-Y to add a new null object, and I'll call this Headphones Controller 1. And move that just above that headphones 1. I need to make sure that I enable the 3D switch on that, and then I just wanna move it to the same position and rotation as the headphones. And a quick way to do that is hold Shift while you use the parent pick whip, select the parent layer and let go. And now that null object has adopted all of the transform properties of the headphone. I just needed that temporarily. I'm now going to unparent the null from the headphones and reverse that so that the headphones are the child of the null object. Now I have a layer of control for rotation, keeping that anchor point right in the center, and I can animate the headphones using just that Y position in relationship to that null object. I'm gonna do the same thing really quickly for the other 4 sets of headphones. And while I do this, if you're interested in learning After Effects from the ground up, definitely check out my masterclass, Launch into After Effects. Inside, you'll make 10 really fun motion design projects and get a complete foundation in how to use After Effects to its full potential. There's a link down in the description. All right, now that that's set up, let's grab all of these null objects, and what I wanna use these for is the rotation control, specifically on the X axis. So I'm going to press the keyframe button on the X rotation for those controllers, and then I'll grab the headphones themselves and add keyframes on the position value as well as the Y rotation. So I'm just gonna add a keyframe there, and now over the span of about 5 seconds or so, we're gonna keyframe this so that they all spiral out while the camera backs out and reorients. So let's just start with the camera move. I'll grab that and just move it to the top so it's easier to access, and switch to my dolly tool and just back this out a bit. It's gonna need to go back quite a bit. And let's move the position back to its default by right-clicking and saying reset. That still just adds a keyframe, preserving our original set of keyframes, and I'll change the Z rotation to 0. Now that actually reset the Z axis too, so I need to dolly this back out again. But if I press the apostrophe to bring up the center of my comp again, I basically want that to be right where those null objects are, because that's where all of the rotation is gonna happen from. So I'm gonna switch to my pan tool, which is the second camera tool right here, and then click and drag while holding Shift. And this is gonna move not just the position, but also the point of interest. And I can align those null objects right in the center of my comp, which is where I want all the headphones to kind of radially spread out from. So we've got this nice dynamic camera move that's pulling back, and now I need to spread out all of these headphones. So let's grab the 5 controllers and press U to bring up the keyframes. This is the X rotation. I'm actually just gonna move these up above all the 3D models just so it's easier to manipulate. And since there are 5 of them, I need to rotate them by increments of 360 divided by 5. So if I say 360 divided by 5, After Effects can do the math for me. That's in increments of 72 degrees. So for this one, it should be 72 times 4, since this is the last one in the list. This one should be 72 times 3, 72 times 2, and just 72 degrees. And now we've got this star shape pattern that's kind of unfurling as the camera backs out. But we also want these to spread out and rotate a bit towards the camera. But that will happen on the 3D models themselves. So I'm gonna collapse up those null objects, switch to the models, and press U again, and these are the properties we need access to. First of all, let's just grab the Y position and back that off so that the headphones are moving away from each other. This is why we parented them to the nulls, so that the nulls can orient them in the right direction, and all we have to do is animate the Y position and they'll all move out from the center. So they start hidden and they rotate out and move into place by the end of it. Now we just need to change the Y rotation, and we can choose which direction these should be rotating. We don't necessarily need to go a full 90 degrees, so maybe I'll still have the logo visible and push them out on that Y position a little bit more. Now obviously I want to be able to center this up in the frame, so I'm going to back out my camera even a little bit further, and again switch to my pan tool, click and drag while holding Shift, and just frame this so that all of the headphones look really nicely centered in the comp. But now I can preview this animation and we can see just how well this is working. It hardly takes any time to render with the advanced 3D render engine, and it would go even faster if I enabled the Draft 3D render view. So I'm gonna leave Draft 3D on, and now I just wanna modify the interpolation of these keyframes. So I'm gonna press U to bring up all of the keyframes at once, select each and every single one of them, and press F9 on the keyboard to easy ease them. But then I'll go straight into my graph editor. I'm viewing the speed graph, which you can change under this menu. Again, that's off the screen recording, but there's speed graph and value graph. This is the speed graph. And I'm just gonna make a selection of all of these keyframes up here and click and drag this handle out. What this graph is just a representation of speed over time, a change in speed over time. So the higher this graph is, the faster the value is changing. But just making that more of a sharp point is going to give us much smoother animation from A to B. And now that I play this back in real time, I can see 5 seconds is just absolutely way too long. So I'm gonna grab all these keyframes and move them back to about 2.5 seconds and see how that looks. Much better, that's a lot snappier. I like that. Now, what I'd like to do is have kind of a camera drift that continues through the entire comp, because I don't need just 2.5 seconds, I really do need something more like 4 or 5. So I'm actually gonna grab all of these keyframes and move them forward in time just a little bit. And there's a really quick way to do this on 3D cameras. Just right click on the camera layer, go to camera, and choose create orbit null. And this is going to create a controller layer that we can use to manipulate the camera, rotating it around, or simply just moving it around, which is what I want to do. So I'm gonna add a position keyframe there, then go forward about 5 seconds and just bring that camera back a little bit further. And that way we have some camera movement from the beginning of our animation all the way through to the end. It's never stopping. All right, that looks pretty good. We've got our headphones animating out. Let's add a background really quick just by double clicking on the rectangle tool with nothing selected. This will be our BG or background, and I'll move that to the bottom of the frame. And I'll double click on this. I'm using a linear gradient here, and I'm gonna just make this look a little bit like it's being lit. So we have a little bit of depth in the background, and I just wanna change the colors up a little bit. So I'm going to edit the gradient, and I'm gonna change it more to a tealish color, something more like the headphones. And I'll just make this one similar, but a little bit darker. Something along those lines, and I'll just reposition this until we get something that looks nice. All right, I think that's gonna work for our background. I'll just lock that layer so I don't modify it. And now let's change the color of each instance of the headphones. Now 3D models currently in the advanced 3D render engine cannot have effects applied. I don't know if that's coming in the future, it would be nice, but in the meantime, the After Effects team have given us a workaround that makes it really easy to apply effects just like you would to any other layer. If you right click on any number of 3D layers, you can go to the Create menu and then say Create 3D Layer Instance, and it will will generate a 2D layer for each one of those models, and they all still render those headphones exactly like before, but since it's a 2D layer, we can apply effects to it. Now, all it's doing is using the CC composite effect to basically render that 3D model on this 2D layer, and it's disabled the visibility of those 3D models. And what's really interesting about this process is if I go back to a point where they're overlapping again and I grab, say, the furthest one back and drag it up to the top, I can actually see that layer in front of the other one. So it's a really interesting hack for being able to composite 3D layers on 2D layers. Regardless, let's go forward in time where we can see all 5 of them and give them some variety in color. So I'm gonna grab the hue and saturation effect and apply that to the first instance and change it to something completely different. Why don't we go with maybe a bright orange? So I'm gonna increase the saturation, the hue, and maybe manipulate the lighting a little bit so it becomes brighter. So let's go to our light and press T to bring up the intensity, and just increase this past 100%. We're gonna just increase the overall exposure of those headphones. I think that looks better. So we've got a pair of orange. Let's copy and paste that hue and saturation effect to the next instance and make it a different color. So maybe something in this reddish pink color, maybe a little less saturated. And I'll just continue this process until I have 5 unique colors. Okay, so that simple color change has really made these headphones pop off of the background. I think I wanna add a little bit more dimension to those headphones. So what I'm going to do is switch back to those controller layers that we spread out in Z space, and I'm going to add a position keyframe on them. So let's press U to see where those keyframes should be. This first set of keyframes is where I wanna add a position keyframe and then move forward to that second set, and I just wanna spread them out in Z space. And to make that easier to see, I'm again gonna switch to my 2-up view, which no longer displays the 3D models since they're hidden, so I'm just gonna temporarily turn them back on, and I just wanna space these out more. So I'll grab the first layer and drag it forward. Second one, pull that one forward a little bit. The middle one can stay where it is, and then we'll do the opposite for the back 2 copies. I'll just push them further back in space until they look like they're equally spaced out. And that just gives a little bit more visual interest to the overall composition from this camera view. And I think I like that a lot better. So I'll just switch back to this 1-up view. And I just noticed that the X rotation on this controller actually never changes. And again, to add a little bit more dimensionality, why don't we also animate that? I'll turn off the actual 3D models one more time just so they don't interfere with the rendering. And I'm gonna just add a keyframe on the X rotation at that 0° value and select all 5 of these at once, and then just rotate them forward a little bit on the Z axis, again, just giving a little bit more of a visual interest to the composition. The camera is also a little bit further back than I'd like it, so I'm gonna grab that camera and dolly in on the Z axis a little bit more, again, selling the depth of all of these headphones. We might even need to move this over to the right just so it doesn't feel too unbalanced. Now I just need to make sure I re-ease all of these keyframes so they're consistent across the board and they all move at the same rates. So I'll just do that all at once inside of the graph editor, and then I can play this back again. Now it is gonna take a little bit longer to render now that we're compositing things using the different instances and applying effects to them. But compared to a 3D package, this is still incredibly fast, and we have so much flexibility being able to stay in the After Effects workflow that we're used to for being able to manipulate things like the color and brightness of each of these objects individually. So there it is in full motion, a very dynamic 3D move. I think that looks great. What I'd like to do now is just add a few finishing touches for compositing's sake. So I'm gonna grab that comp, the Bluetooth headphones, and drag it into a new comp. And I'll call this one Headphones Radial Unfold. And this is where I'll do my compositing. So first of all, I wanna add a glow. So I'm going to just make an adjustment layer, Control Alt Y or Command Option Y on a Mac, and I'll look for the glow effect, and we'll just apply that over everything. I don't want it to be nearly that intense, so I'll turn the intensity down. And maybe even the threshold, I'll make that a little bit higher and just soften this out. So let's go to a frame where we can see all of the headphones at once and turn that off and back on. It just gives a little bit of glow to everything and makes it all feel a little bit brighter. I'd also like to add a vignette, and I'm going to do that with another adjustment layer. We'll call this one Vignette. And I'll search for the vignette effect, apply that, make the angle of view a little bit wider and maybe pin the highlights, and then increase the amount a little bit. So that's gonna give us just a little bit of darkness around the outside edges and bring the focus to the center of the frame. One more thing I want to do to this animation that I think will make it feel even more alive is rotate that environment light. So let's head back to our pre-comp, get out of the graph editor, and find our environment light layer. I'll press R to bring up the rotation, and this Y-axis rotation is what I want to manipulate over time. So it's, again, a little bit more render intensive now that we're doing all of this compositing, but I'm just going to set a keyframe on the Y rotation value at the beginning, and then go to about 5 seconds, and increase this a bit so that it's rotating throughout the entire comp. Now, if I jump back to my render comp and I preview, I'll edit over the preview time and we'll take a look at the final render. And here's what it looks like in full motion. With that rotating environment, it just changes up the way that all of those highlights are hitting the edges of the headphones, and it feels like there's more going on than what we're actually seeing. Now, one final touch that we could add to this is some fake motion blur. The advanced 3D render engine doesn't currently support motion blur natively, but the CC Force Motion Blur effect does a really good job, but it is extremely render intensive, especially with all of this other compositing we're doing. So I would probably drop this down to 90 degrees or maybe 120 degrees for the shutter angle, just so it's not too extreme. And leave this off until you're really ready to render it for real. But this is the final touch that I think we're gonna need to finish off this product render. And here it is with that motion blur applied, just making it feel a little bit more realistic. Now, I've also made a tutorial over on Adobe Creative Cloud's YouTube channel if you're interested in learning how to cut a 15-second promo video for this headphone brand together and adding in motion graphics on top of it using Mogurts from Adobe Stock. Go head to their channel, there's a link down in the description to that video as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day.